Hi, and welcome to Your Dream Power. We're looking for transforming you so that you're living from the inside out instead of allowing the world to dictate to you. Today, I have a very special guest coming to us from California. Her name is Veronica Lee. Veronica, thank you for joining us today.
Absolutely, Patty. I'm happy to be here.
Great. Well, Veronica is a transformational visionary. So she's perfect for this show. And she's consciously committed to supporting our collective spiritual evolution. Working professionally as an intuitive mentor, speaker, and writer, she's been sharing life-changing insights and soul guidance for almost 15 years. Raised in metaphysics, she began exploring the mystical realms as a young child in the 1970s, where practicing intuitive perception, hands-on healing, meditation, visualization, and manifesting was integral. Believing joy comes from living a soul-aligned, authentic life, Veronica encourages, embraces wholesomeness, whether making peace with imperfections, reclaiming empowerment, or developing inherent spiritual gifts. Her work includes hundreds of articles and can be found at www.veronicaleetv. And I've also put in the show notes some ways that you can get in touch with Veronica. So Veronica, wow, that's something. You've been doing this since the 1970s. You look so great.
Oh, thank you. Yes. Basically, my mom discovered metaphysics when she was a teenager herself. And as a teenage mom, I was a little toddler at the time, and she landed really comfortably in her place in the new age world, so to speak. Mm-hmm. And so ever since I was a child, I was attending her little weekly groups of meditation and hands-on healing and all that, strange stuff. And it was very normal in my family until I recognized from the outside world how odd that was. And then there were, parts of me that kind of wanted to be normal, but then there was the other part that just loved the mystical. And so every birthday, I would wish I had magical powers. My favorite TV show was Bewitched at the time, and I couldn't, do my nose like she did. But at the same time, I thought, whatever that power is, I'll take it. And then, of course, years later, I recognized, hey, I do have my own mystical powers, and I'm highly intuitive, and that just tends to be my particular gift. But we all have them.
I was just reading a bit in a book today about the magical powers that we have. And, my website's called Your Dream Power because we do have these powers inside of us. And I think it's, you're saying in the 1970s, if you'd have told me this back in the 1970s, I'd have thought you were crazy. But the more I read, the more I understand, the more I've learned over the past 6-8 years, the more I wished I'd have known this back in the 70s when you did.
Yeah, and I see that what's happening is collectively we are waking up, and waking up doesn't mean that we've come to this place of a particular belief system, but what we're waking up to is our inherent power, recognizing, wow, we really do have more than what we realized, right? Mm-hmm. It's like, we recognize that we can, see, smell, taste, that our 5 physical senses are completely intact for the most part. And some people might need a hearing aid, or they might need glasses, or maybe they're missing some of their, vital senses in terms of, let's say they're blind, but then their other senses pick up. Well, when I was young, the first thing, kind of like metaphysics 101 that my mom taught was, we are all psychic. And so it was from that point that it was welcomed, this other sight, or this other way of hearing, or this other way of sensing was absolutely welcomed. So if you could imagine, how easy it would have been growing up for all of us if we were validated for our, metaphysical senses, the senses that are, a little harder to tangibly experience, but are just as valid, if not in some ways more so.
Right. So my accountability partner and I, we read Neville Goddard, and he did a lot of that mystic and that, realm also. And just reading the stories of people that he taught, And you do have these powers inside of us. And yet so often, we don't develop them. So how do you help a client develop those powers?
So, my number one gift, I think that just comes so naturally to me is really seeing people's gifts, seeing them on such a deep level. And what I can usually do is see people's inherent spiritual gifts pretty quickly. And what I see that as is more or less something that they take for granted that they don't even recognize. So for example, it might be that they're really good with people and they're thinking, well, how is that intuitive? Or how is that, something metaphysical? It's like, no, because you are intuitively reading people and you can see how relationships work. And then you know how to kind of create this nice, let's say, atmosphere for those people, right? If they're a people type person. Many times we might experience what we would call, empathy, right? Or we're empaths, right? That's the kind of popular word right now, is to be an empath. And if you think about it, we all have that ability as children to be empathetic, right? They say that when a baby cries, that, that'll trigger other babies crying because there's that natural, empathy. Well, oftentimes, if we are raised in, dysfunctional families, which is the majority of us, or even, let's say, abusive or really frightening families, we develop that empathy or that ability to feel the situations out as sort of a, saving ourselves mechanism, right? It becomes a survival piece. And then it becomes, obviously, really hyper vigilant, trying to make sure that everything's okay. But in essence, even in terms of just navigating, most of us have recognized our power of empathy, of feeling situations. And that doesn't mean that just because sometimes it may have been triggered by something, damaging or frightening or abusive, it's still valid. It's still a valid, gift that we have. And maybe what we start to learn is to kind of tone it down. So we're not, afraid or so worried about other people's feelings, but instead recognize and go, oh, I recognize this person is experiencing rage and I really don't want anything to do with it. So I'm going to step away from that. Right. So those are the types of gifts that most of us have, really subtly or even overtly, that we don't necessarily see as intuition, and yet it is.
When I like to talk to clients about, we're all energy, everything's energy. And so when we have that intuitive feeling, we're picking up somebody's energy. And we can immediately know by picking up their energy if they're having a good day, if they're having a bad day, if they're really negative, if they're a very positive person. And you can feel that as well as you can see it. So, so much you can use your senses, but a lot of it is using that intuition that you have and picking up that energy from them. So,
absolutely.
Yeah. So what do you think has changed that people are starting to come around and awaken to this? What do you think has caused that? You maybe have seen that progression,
Yes. Yeah, definitely have seen the progression and how it's actually becoming more popular right now. And so anytime that there's a trend, and I'll just kind of sidestep for a second, anytime there's a trend of something, there's something that's become popular, be it a TV show or a diet or whatever, there's going to be this initial excitement, and then there's going to be the fall off. So a lot of people who are suddenly getting into this, might, think, oh, this is so cool. And then maybe it'll hit up against their, fundamental beliefs and kind of wait a minute, this isn't really jiving with me because it's so counter to what I'm used to. But the other piece might be that, let's say they've learned, this, let's say the secret, the power to manifest. And then things are going well. And then suddenly they turn, sideways, and they're like, wait a minute. How does this, fit into this new reality that I'm experiencing, that I've been promised, that if I just visualize, that if I just do this, that, or the other, it'll all come together. And then they hit that wall. And so that could be another cause for them to go, oh, this is all just, crap, I don't believe in any of this. Right. So there's going to be that natural fall off. But in terms of the whole picture of this awakening process, we've really come in, it's like, if you think about it, it's kind of cool. The songs that were popular in, the early 70s were songs like, this is the age of Aquarius, right? The dawning of the age of Aquarius, and up and away. And the name of the band was the Fifth Dimension, right? It's like, so this is a really a movement that's really come from the soul and the collective souls of most of us who either came in already awake or said, hey, when I incarnate around, 2020 or whatever year it might be, I'm going to really come into this remembrance of my power, remembrance of my connection to all that is, remembrance of my inherent gifts, right? And so it's really a matter of, this intention that we, set up before we incarnated, but also kind of like a wave that energetically, as more and more people awaken, it becomes much more available. Because along with awakening isn't just knowing you're intuitive, knowing that you're inherently powerful, et cetera, but there also becomes this alignment with higher frequencies and higher vibrations, which is, joy and living in this more expanded state. And in that place, the vibration raises, for self, and therefore becomes accessible for others, right? So by being in our light, by being in our truth, by being in our power, we are opening our own frequency to these higher realms, and therefore it becomes more accessible and easier to shift those around you.
When we talk about this, and you mentioned New Age and so on, this stuff has been around for centuries. It's not like it's new.
Yes, exactly.
It's just that we were unaware. And I know some of my very favorite books that have this in there, such as The Science of Getting Rich and Think and Grow Rich, and some of those books that have some of this information, it's hidden. Because if they would have come out and said those type of things back in the early 1900s, they would have been considered crazy. So, but the information's there, and you go back into the Bible, the information's there.
Yes.
It's been there for centuries.
Well, since we've incarnated, there have been many of us who've remembered, who we are on a soul level, and, our connection to source consciousness. Absolutely. And if we think about the works of Rumi, and how he really recognizes this interconnectedness. And each religion, in essence, has a mystical component. Yes. Each religion. And so oftentimes that's sort of the fringe, right? That'll often be considered the fringe, or the area that's like, oh, no. But it's really, in essence, not the fringe, it's the heart. And it's more that those fundamental beliefs are the ones that are more, let's say, hardlined and linear and packaged. Those are actually the fringe. Those are along the outskirts, because those are the ones that have moved away from the heart, due to fear, constraints, belief in, a certain way, whatever it might be. And what I'm seeing is people are now going, okay, whatever that is that's kept me away from self, away from source, away from this love that I am, or this ability that I have, or whatever it is my authentic self is calling me back to, I want that again. And that's the, true awakening. It's not, again, any particular philosophy or any particular way of thinking, spiritually, but really coming back to our core essence of who we've come here to be and who we are.
So what do you think is the easiest way for somebody to start becoming more awakened and becoming more connected to that source energy?
Yeah, I think it's sort of, start where you're planted kind of, things, whatever resonates with you. So if there's a particular book that you're excited about, or a particular practice or modality that you're interested in, it's sort of like, go play, go experience, go try. When I think a lot of times what'll happen is our true awakening, we may be interested and we may be like dabbling, or we might want to like explore these patterns or these pathways, but Many times, real awakening, unfortunately, the way that humans have designed things and sort of do things best is through crisis, right? And so many times it's going to come because we've hit that rock bottom, or we hit that wall, or we've hit something that says, why is my life such a mess? And how do I start to put the pieces back together? And what we recognize is that shattering were often pieces that weren't ours anyway. They were our parents or our societies, right, or our family members' projections on us, or beliefs that kept everything together. And through some kind of crisis, when everything falls apart and we're starting to kind of pick up the pieces, we want to really be more mindful and go, wait a minute, what piece is actually mine? And that's the beginning of that exploration. So it doesn't have to be through crisis. It can be through exploration and fun, and that's the way I would encourage it to go. But most people will often have some resistance because they don't want to be the weirdo off, to the side going, oh, I don't want my friends to know about this. And at the same time, it's like their soul is calling them back, right? And if they only knew that their friends' souls are calling them back at some point as well, then it might not feel so frightening.
Yeah, that you're right about that. It's that is that inner part of you that's longing for something more. It's longing to do something, and you have to go on that journey to figure all that out. That's what I had to do. So what do you do when you've got somebody that has been, manifesting things along the way, and then all of a sudden it's like their whole world falls apart? How do you bring them back?
Perfect question. That happened to me, honestly. So, and I didn't leave metaphysics. I never left metaphysics. It's sort of like, this is so ingrained in who I am that I've never been able to step away from that in any kind of way. I'm, been ultra conscious my whole life, ultra intuitive, and just super aligned with this, sort of connection to my soul. That's just kind of inherent to who I am and how I was raised. But what I will say is that as a child, I was really good at manifesting, and as a teen. And so in 1983-ish, when I was probably 16 or 17, I wrote in my, journal, my perfect guy, because I was taught how to visualize and, all that manifest. So I described, to the T, my future husband. And I met my husband in 86 when I was 20. And he fit it. I mean, like I was very clear as a teenager, tall, dark skin, beautiful teeth, plays a little guitar. I mean, that's how specific I was. I didn't talk about so many other qualities because, again, I was 16. And then, we were married for 15 years. We had 4 beautiful children. And then he hit his own dark night of the soul, and he had basically a nervous breakdown. And I'm thinking, okay, how did I create this? Obviously, this is his soul journey, but it's impacting me and my family. This is not what I signed up for. And when everything started to fall apart, that's when I really stepped more deeply into this work. So there was a part of me that kind of wanted to be normal, right? In other words, it was my cousin who our family psychic actually married my husband and I. But everybody in our family kept saying that my cousin was going to be psychic. She was going to be the next mystic, or, whatever. Mm-hmm. So for me, it was like, okay, well, I'll just do the interior design thing. But meanwhile, I knew I had the secret and could manifest whatever. But it was through this crisis of where my husband and I separated that it brought me back to the question of, how did I create this? How did this happen? Right. And what I saw, and I literally was asking, source and tapping in, and I was shown, manifesting is sort of this masculine, this manual doing, right? There's this active, masculine energy of doing, but allowing is the receptive, the receiving, the feminine. And what we're trying to do at this time in our consciousness is really balance out our, imbalance between the divine masculine and feminine. And so this is what we like to focus on: the doing, the visualization, the having, right? But what's happening is we can get really trapped in this ego, and this ego wants to have the life we want. And the soul, which is much more rich and juicy and divinely aligned with sort of what we need, is going to give us what we've signed up for and what will bring us more spiritual growth. And that's also going to come from this place of receiving, certain circumstances that make us question who we are, that make us, stumble and fall and go, wait a minute, I don't know everything I think I know, right? And to really learn how to surrender and move with life rather than constantly, made to order, right? So that's really an important piece to recognize, is that many times something like manifesting or our intuitive skills will work, and we're like, wow, look how powerful we are, but it's not meant to be used by the ego, to kind of make our life the way we think they should be, but rather to help us recognize our power, and then to remember life and our soul and the divine knows far more than we do. And we get to experience a whole new way of being in ourselves that is more about surrender and alignment than just about manifesting and knowing. Does that make sense?
Yes, it does make sense. Yeah. So when you are thinking about leaving or living a soul-led life, how do you do that? How do you allow your soul to lead?
Yes. And so, one of the things, my mom would always encourage me to do, which I just, I couldn't stand, she would, suggest this, but it was like, oh, you need to meditate. I'm like, I have 4 children. My life's in chaos. How am I going to meditate? And so that's an option. It's an option for a lot of people, and it doesn't have to be for everyone. How I started to integrate, let's say, meditation into my life when everything was falling apart, I would, wake up, stay in my bed. I had, my twins or my babies, one on either side of me, and just like in this complete surrender position, like they're on top of me and I'm laying there, and it's like, oh, I have such a crazy day ahead. But I would just take a moment to kind of feel and experience each of my, energy centers of the chakra system, right? Just kind of experience and like pay attention, like what's going on up here? Is it kind of, what color is this? And what does it feel like? And then coming down and just doing this simple little like system scan within my body, taking some breaths, dropping into that moment. And it might just kind of like help me center a moment, right? Just a little bit before my crazy day would begin. The other is, I highly recommend working in some capacity, whatever that looks like, whether it's meditation or, for me, I work in the Akashic Records. A lot of people believe the Akashic Records has to do with past lives. It is so not that for me. It's really about connecting to source. And so having this, whatever communication is with your higher power, with your source, in whatever you define it as. My mom was very much into meditation and ritual. And so, and she loved goddesses. And so for her, it would be through connecting with, whichever goddess she felt most inclined to, and maybe doing ritual. So those types of things, whatever it is for you that says, I'm ready to connect, to be open, and to listen, to experience what, my soul is telling me, that's the start. That's the start of this willingness and this connection piece.
So when you're mentioning things like that, I had one of the mentors I work with, and he was surprised that I was a Christian, and yet I still believed in all this. And I said, gee, my dad was even a minister, but I do believe in this source energy. I believe that you can manifest. And he said to me, a lot of Christians are not going to see that. So how do you deal with that? With, we know that it's in every religion. We know it's there. We know Jesus talked about it. We know it. Why isn't that more prevalent in religions?
Yeah. The hard part for me is my mom was raised Catholic, and she basically denounced Catholicism when she was, young. And I was born when she was 16. She was married, I was born on my parents' first anniversary. He was Catholic, she was Catholic. So they baptized me. And I think she did it out of just in case, it was like an insurance policy for her connection with God. But then she discovered, like I said, metaphysics when she was around 19, and I was about 3. But what was really interesting is I was not raised with Christianity at all. In fact, if anything, it was sort of like, a taboo word, because she had such a really hard growing up and such. And she was in her words, she was mad at God. Why would he allow her to cause this abuse? Have this abusive upbringing? Why, would there be wars in the world? Right. And so she had to do her own reconciliation and find her connection to what felt most alignment. What I see in terms of the bigger picture of why it's so uncomfortable for many people to understand or connect with their mystical power is very much, or mysticism in general, in any religion, it's a place of empowerment, right? And so there's the external, which is, do we live in a society that actually wants people to be empowered? That's a really good question. Mm-hmm. But the other is what Marianne Williamson talks about. It's not our dark that most frightens us, it's our light. And when I look at people and work with people, what I see is all the blocks that have been put into place that kept them from their power. Many of them are going to be external. Many of them are going to be, mom didn't want you to see her, deeper side, or this other situation might have happened that kept them from their power. But more importantly, they feel threatened by their own power, because it's like, oh my gosh, now I need to be responsible for my actions. Now I need to have some sense of responsibility to my soul if I step into my power, right? So those are really the biggest obstacles that I see to embracing our own mysticism. It's not the religious out there, it's really what's going on in here. And if we think about it, absolutely metaphysically, what was going on in here is what's going on out there, right? So when we start to not fear our own mystical nature, when we start to really embrace who we are on a soul level, then we start attracting people in our life who are going to attack that. It starts to transform within us. And again, that energy becomes more accessible to those around us. It doesn't mean they have to think what we think or believe what we believe. It just means that they can start to make peace with themselves more easily too, because you've just put that out there. You've healed that within you, and it becomes accessible to the whole.
Well, I know one of the things I'm trained with the Proctor Gallagher Institute and Bob Proctor, and he always talked about, we live on 3 planes simultaneously. We have our physical body and we have our brain, our intellect, but it's our soul that's really the highest level. And that's where we want to get. We want to develop that closer relationship with that higher power, whatever you call it. And, it's just so often we get busy in our lives, and we just don't even take time to know who we are. Absolutely. And what it is we believe, and that becomes frustrating.
Yeah. And I think what it comes down to when you said, and what it is we believe, it's almost as if that becomes sort of the quest. But what if we think of it like the Native Americans, who often refer to God or divine as the great mystery? What if we don't have to know?
And it is a mystery.
It is a mystery. What if we don't have to know in order to make something valid? What if we get to just experience what is and have this relationship with the question rather than seeking the answer, right? And so again, we've come into this like 3D practical, I want things to have answers. And that's what's been navigating the ship. And it's not really taking us to very wonderful places for many, in many ways.
And it is a journey, and you get to see a little glimpse, and then, you go a little further and you see another glimpse, and you never know it all. You just never do.
Yes, exactly.
Well, we only have about a minute left here, Veronica. How can people get in touch with you if they're interested in connecting? I know I have information in show notes. Is there anything you want to tell them?
Yes. Basically, anybody can go to my website at any time. It's veronicalee.tv, and that stands for Transformational Visionary. And if you want to see what's going on, I have a June special coming up. Well, right now I'm in a May special, which is, mentoring hours that you get bonus hours. But in June, I'll be doing a 30-day journey of the soul. I'm working on the platform right now. I've offered this course twice already in the past year, but basically I'm just doing the, back end stuff on the computer to get it launched. And so it's only $44, and you can actually get $5 off by using a coupon. And so it's really a guided journey to help you reclaim your soul power. And I do this through lots of, teachings and live. Some of it's live through Zoom. Much of it is online courses that is audio, video, and written content. So yeah. And I see we do have someone here who's joined us.
Yes. I'll just stop the recording, then they can join us.